Hi, everybody. This is Christian-apologist.com, where truth matters. This is Kayse Melone. Let's hear what she has to say.
How many times I've had a variation of this conversation with a man. It usually goes something like this. Him. Yeah, I believe in God, but in a spiritual way, not a religious way. Me. I respect that, but I can't bring myself to use the word God because I think it places the masculinity of God the Father above femininity. Him. Oh, well, obviously God is genderless. The idea of God the Father is just a construct. Me. So why don't you say goddess? Why don't you say goddess instead? Or why wouldn't you default to a term that's actually gender neutral, like spirit or source? Is it perhaps because you're still unconsciously using the word that brings you, a man, the most power? And of course, he'll say, I mean, that's just how I mean it, as genderless. It doesn't mean I think men are more divine than women. And to that, I always say, that seems awfully convenient, but okay. Did you know that the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, had a wife, according to ancient Israelite mythology? Her name was Asherah, and at one point she was worshipped alongside Yahweh as a divine counterpart. Artifacts, inscriptions, and historical texts suggest that the early Israelites acknowledged both a masculine and feminine aspect of the divine. And yet, Asherah was erased purposefully. As monotheistic traditions solidified, the feminine was stripped away and the singular masculine God took center stage.
I don't completely disagree with her, but my reasoning is going to maybe surprise you, especially if you're from her camp and you're a non-Christian or someone who has deconverted, as I understand she did. What I'm going to share with you is what actually is going on in the Old Testament. Now, I would not say that God is genderless. I would say that we understand God as our Father. That's the only way that we can really come to understand him. As a Christian, I believe in God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And I also believe in many beliefs surrounding Jesus. Jesus Christ died for our sins and so on. But I wanted to talk about a couple of things she said. Now, she's saying, oh my goddess, a little later in this video. She thinks it's kind of a little bit edgy to say that, oh my goddess. And I have to sort of sympathize with her because I would call her a third generation feminist. Her name's Kayse Melone. I would call her a third generation feminist because I feel like she's drunk the Kool-Aid of modern times where women feel like we have been discriminated against. And in her view, she thinks Christian women have been discriminated against because we don't worship goddesses. Rather, we worship a God, the God the Father, if you're a Christian, or if you're from other Abrahamic traditions, different versions of God the Father. If you're a Muslim, you've got the Allah, which is also a patriarchy, if you want to call it that. But beyond that, let's speak to the early belief systems that she was referencing, because I think this is really important. And I think her reference that she talked about with Jesus, I'm sorry, with Asherah, I think we need to address that right now. So let's take a look at Baal and Asherah, because Asherah was in the Old Testament, referenced frequently, especially apparently in the ancient Hebrew. You can see the word Asherah referenced frequently. Asherah, you can see here visually, if you're looking at the camera here, you can see visually on the far right, there's Asherah, an image of Asherah, and there you see the image of Baal. And so let's discuss who exactly these characters are. So if we go to ancient Canaan, Mesopotamia, and Phoenicia and look at this idea of Baal, it wasn't that Asherah was the spouse of the Almighty God, our Father, and whose son is Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. It wasn't that. The Asherah mentioned in the Old Testament was the old Baal, who was out of ancient Canaan, Mesopotamia, and Phoenicia. Baal was a very evil god, a supreme god, and a storm deity depicted often with a lightning bolt. And Asherah was the female partner, usually depicted as a carved pole or tree trunk without limbs. People erected altars to Baal and made Asherah poles, as evidenced in 2 Kings 21:3, which God commanded them to destroy, as evidenced in Judge 6:25. These were fertility gods. They were embracing sexual perversion. With these types of gods, people were often prostituting themselves in the temple and doing disgusting sexual acts that weren't to be done. They were prohibited types of acts under the God of the Old Testament. Their prophets, 400, 500 of them, featured at Jezebel's table. So you get a real taste of who these people were. Jezebel was a very evil queen in ancient times. You can see more on that in 1 Kings 18:19. And people worshipped Baal. Okay, people worship Baal, and I'm going to show you some evidence of what they did to worship Baal in a moment. You can see again that's in 2 Kings 17:6. People, in fact, served the Baals and the Asherahs in Judges 3:7. So these were, again, going back, these were part of a pagan belief system. And that was dominant in ancient times, this pagan belief system. We still saw evidence of that in Roman times. During the Roman Empire, we saw paganism. And today, in fact, I would make the argument that this girl, Kayse, perhaps is falling in with some sort of modern version of paganism. She thinks that this idea of worshiping goddesses is good. She probably doesn't realize that the pagan system of belief, which is prevalent throughout the entire globe, and that's going to get to my big question that I'm going to ask you at the end of this video. The entire globe, we saw evidence of these pagan beliefs where there were all kinds of these gods, female and male gods, gods and goddesses all over the world. It's going to surprise you that this is actually in the Bible. Besides what I just mentioned here, there is a reference of the sons of God in the Bible. And I'm going to show you that as we progress through this video. I'm going to make a reference just as a hint to my Christian friends who know Michael Heiser, the late Michael Heiser. He wrote a book called Unseen Realm, and I'm going to reference a little bit of that. So my dog decided to speak up on that. That's her opinion, apparently. Hey. So let's talk about where, this is going to surprise you perhaps, and this is also mentioned in Kayse's video, but a little bit of this. All around the world, we have references to fertility goddesses. And think about that. In Egypt, we had Isis as one example. I'm just giving examples within cultures, but there's multiple gods. I could talk about thousands of gods. Isis was the goddess of motherhood, magic, and fertility. In the Native American population, Adahensik was the Iroquois Indian goddess of marriage and childbirth. Kokopelli was the goddess of fertility, childbirth, and agriculture. Chimalma in the Aztec was the goddess of fertility, life, death, and rebirth. In Japan, Kichijotin was the goddess of happiness, fertility, and beauty. In Inca, Mama Okil was the mother goddess, fertility. The Inuit and Mayan also believed in Anka, the goddess of fertility and childbirth. Armenian was Anahit, the goddess of fertility, heating, and wisdom. Chinese, Jutin Zhuanu was a fertility goddess and deity of war, and in Filipino, there was Ikapati, the goddess of cultivated land and fertility. So you can just see examples all over the world. Now, continuing in the Indian belief system, and then many of these are still prevalent today. Bhavani is the goddess of fertility. Lakshmi is the goddess of prosperity, wealth, and fertility. Interestingly enough, my Hindu colleague tells me that he worships Lakshmi. And that, again, is the goddess of prosperity. He's very prosperous and wealthy, and that's what's that. That's what's that. That's what it is. And the Manasa is a snake goddess of fertility and prosperity. There was also Matrikas, and that's a plurality, a group of gods associated with motherly power. In Iran, you have Ashi, the goddess of fertility and fortune. In Vietnam, Ba Mu, again, a plural, motherly goddesses responsible for creating portions of kids. Hittite has Shaushka, the goddess of fertility, war, and healing. So the bottom line, and you can see more here, I've gotten the Celtic, Finnish, Germanic, Danish, Greek, Roman, Slavic, Hawaiian, Australian. I'm listing a whole bunch of others, starting from the top: Bridget, Round, Esther, Gefjun, Aphrodite, Demeter, Bonadia, Kostroma, Haumea, and Angia, all again goddesses related to fertility. They're all over the world, all over the globe, these goddesses, okay? And what did they do? What are some of the things that these goddesses and gods led people to do? Unfortunately, in many cultures, including 9 that I've listed here, tons of them in the North American and South American region in pre-European times, when the Europeans came and colonized the North American and South American lands, the Aztec, Maya, Toltec, Inca, and Olmec were all sacrificing their children for better crops. In Babylon, Canaan, and the Israelites even did it prior to God's command to not do that. They were sacrificing to Baal, interestingly enough. Again, go back. Baal was the spouse, if you will, of Asherah, mentioned in the Old Testament. You can see evidence here of the Mayan belief system. Here's evidence of child sacrifice. It's disgusting. Evidence here in the Aztec of child sacrifice. That's what they did. They thought that the gods wanted them to do that. Now, where would they get this idea? Here's the thought experiment before I go back to Kayse's video. Was it a coincidence that all ancient cultures featured goddesses of fertility? Is that a coincidence? And why did so many disconnected cultures engage in the morally egregious act of sacrificing their own children? Did humans across the globe dream up the same types of goddesses just by coincidence? Or are we in the midst of a spiritual battle and all humans have been influenced by the same spiritual forces? I argue the latter makes sense. Now, does this come from the Bible? Let's take a look at what Psalm 22 says, Psalm 82. Good morning, Utopia Buster. God bless. Psalm 82 says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. What is he saying in that last line? That is God's way to tell, O God, or Jesus, the begotten, the only begotten Son of God, that you are going to reclaim the world, which he did. You remember at the end of the Gospels, after he resurrected, he said that all power has been given to him. He reclaimed the land from these gods, these spiritual beings that were dominating. You see evidence of that in the book of Daniel. So he reclaimed the land, the earth, basically reclaiming the kingdoms. What happened was a third of the angels fell from heaven, and they had been given dominion over different areas of the world. And unfortunately, they became more and more corrupt until we saw what happened here in Psalm 82. And so we do have evidence in the Bible of a spiritual warfare against good versus evil. We also see evidence of the fall from good, which is the evil, which is demons, which were made into angels who became demons, fell from the sky. But let's go back to what Kayse says, because this is such a unique perspective. And I also kind of feel akin to Kayse, because when I was in college, she looks like, I think she's a recent college graduate. She said she went to college and she came in there as a Christian and started questioning her beliefs, read the Bible, looked at it through a different lens. She said she was sitting there with a book by C.S. Lewis, the book on, I forgot what it was, but some book on astrophysics or physics or something like that. She read Mere Christianity and she read some other books, but then she read the book, The Trilogy. That's what it was. And then she read Ayn Rand and she read Atlas Shrugged. I actually loved Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, love that. But I didn't take the idea from Ayn Rand that selfishness is a good thing, which is what Kayse seems to derive from that. So let's take a look at a little bit more of this video. So the bottom line that you're seeing here, and what I want to convey, is that when we see evidence of people worshiping other gods all throughout the world, that's number one, that's biblical. It's even shown here in Psalm 82. Number two, we see evidence of spiritual battle going all throughout the Bible. Okay, so we know that's going on. Number three, people do worship false gods. It says it says quite early in the Bible in Joshua 24:10, as for me and my family, as for me and mine, we will worship the Lord. You know, you can choose to worship whichever gods you want. And so the thing with Kayse that some, I think, atheists have fallen prey to is the idea of sort of worshiping yourself as a god and believing in your own divinity and really wanting to elevate women. Now, I'm going to comment on some of her comments on women and the patriarchy next, because I also kind of fell prey to that and some of those thoughts. I was an early feminist, not third generation, probably first generation. My belief was that females should have equal rights, which we do in the West, thankfully. But in some places, they still don't, unfortunately, especially Muslim countries. But so that was the idea. So, but I never had the idea that females should also be revered as gods or goddesses, or we should imagine some female goddesses. Yeah, Utopia Buster says, I've become highly skeptical of Ayn Rand. Granted, she had some good insights into government, but not so much in everything else. Exactly. In fact, I think it's the Satanic Temple or the Temple of Satan or the Church of Satan. I forget which one, but one of them has a mention of her and has built its egoistic belief system based on what Ayn Rand said. She was terribly selfish. Apparently, she was a cheater. She was basically out there, what he called breaking households with doing some of the things that weren't exactly meant to be done. Like, you're not supposed to go out there and be an adulterer. So she did a lot of things in her personal life that were consistent with her belief in selfishness. But I digress. Let's take a look at what Kayse has to say. So we're going to go back to Kayse here because I think some of her insights are hopefully not prevalent, but could be something that a growing number of, I would say maybe she's a Gen Z, the Gen Z population might embrace. So let's have a listen.
The idea of a goddess was systematically removed from religious texts, practices, and doctrines. So I'm going to ask you this: where did the goddess go? And more importantly, why does it matter? Some people argue that referring to God in masculine terms is harmless. They claim it's just linguistic habit, a cultural convention with no real implications.
I wouldn't say that at all. We are sons of God, and Jesus referred to his own father, as Abba. And so it's very clear that we're to understand him as our father, not our genderless being or our mother or anything like that. He is our father. And so that's the way we refer to him, and that's the only way we can really understand him. And he's not a they. Okay, here we go.
But I don't buy it. Language shapes perception, and perception shapes reality. When the divine is consistently referred to as masculine, as he, him, as God the Father, whether consciously or not, it reinforces the idea that masculinity is superior, more powerful, more authoritative, more divine. And if someone intellectually believes that God is genderless, their language still upholds the hierarchy of patriarchy. And let's not pretend that hierarchy and patriarchy doesn't spill over into the rest of society.
There's an assumption here that patriarchy is a bad thing. And I think that that is an assumption, and I think it's actually played out where it's a false assumption. I think a patriarchal society ordered by the family, with the father as the head of the family, the mother following as the person who works with the father, sort of as co-family leaders. I think the two go together, but there has to be a hierarchical order, and it goes the father, the mother, and then the children. That's just how it is ordered. In fact, it's pointed out in the Bible quite a bit. But we also have before that Jesus. So above the father in the family, the person to whom we should be addressing our concerns and our prayers and everything else is Jesus. So it goes Jesus, the father, the mother, and then the family. And so that's just how it works. That's how it's worked for thousands of years. Matriarchal societies don't do too well, because if they did, we'd see a lot of them today, and we don't. And if we want to talk about biology and survival of the fittest, those clearly didn't make it because we just don't see them today. Worshiping women as goddesses. Now, the most successful societies in the world tend to be the ones that worship and believe in the truth, which is Jesus. And that's a male who came down and was made flesh and dwelt among us. So that's just what it is. Now, you can't deny the fact that Jesus was a male. That's going to bother some people, but that's a simple fact. And so he came down here as a male. He referred to his father as father. And so that's the deal. So that's just the way it is. You just have to kind of deal with it. But that's the structure of the way that it's always been. That's the way that humanity was made. And that's how God made humanity. Now, as far as female rights, yeah, females should get rights. Females should be able to vote, for sure. Females should be able to take jobs that they want. Aside from certain jobs. Now, God ordained males to serve certain roles in the church, and he ordained females to serve other kinds of roles. We're complementary. That's just how it is.
For centuries, masculinity has been elevated, idolized, and positioned as the default, whether in religion, politics, or
It's not that it's been positioned. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. Sorry. I'm a female. I see it. I'm old. I've been around the bush for a long time. That's just how it is. That's how the world is made. And you can push back on it all you want, but you're not going to be able to do too much. It's better just to kind of fit into society, make it work, go out, have lots of get married to one person, one husband. If you're a female, one wife, one husband. Go out, get married, have a big family. That's the way God wants us to do it. That's what makes us happiest. You will not be happy if you're constantly kicking against the goads. Okay. Remember when St. Paul was trying to do that? Jesus said, stop kicking against the goads. It's the way it has always been. Sorry about that.
Philosophy. From the very first moments of Western civilization, we've been conditioned to see power, leadership, wisdom, and divinity as masculine traits. Meanwhile, femininity has either been reduced to a secondary role or dismissed altogether.
Femininity is beautiful. Again, it's a compliment to masculinity. In fact, we prefer that males are masculine and females are feminine. That's just how it is. That also, stop kicking against the goads. As a male, we love masculine, manly men. I mean, that's just what it is. You want to marry a manly man, and a man wants to marry a feminine woman. That's kind of how it is. But here's what Utopia Buster says. It's a pretty good point here. Within the hierarchy, real men are a side protector and provider, the guide, not authoritarian, but the guide. Yeah, that's true. A good guide. Again, not throwing the hammer down as you might see in some other belief systems around the world, with particular attention to the Muslim faith and the way that they, unfortunately, women are considered half brains and secondary status, which is a real shame. That's in the text. I'm not making this up. I got it from their text. But the other thing is, traditionally, going back thousands and thousands of years, the way the family structure was, there was a male, a female, and the kids. And the male would often go to war when there was a battle going on, and the female would stay home as the nurturer and take care of the family. That's the way it has been for thousands of years. The only kind of strangeness is we had in the past 150, 200 years with the Industrial Revolution, where females are getting into the workforce in greater and greater numbers, and not as many are staying home full-time with children. I'm one of them. I'm in the workforce full-time myself. I'm an associate dean in the College of Business, so I definitely can speak to women in the workforce. And sometimes women have to be in the workforce for one reason or another, or sometimes they just choose to be in the workforce. My kids happen to be in my university, so it works out really well because I can see them all the time, which is fantastic. But I digress. Anyway, so let's keep listening to what Kayse has to say, because I think she's giving us a glimpse of the Gen Z philosophy of many. Now, from what I've seen from her other videos, she might endorse the idea of being a spiritual person. Okay. I remember I was like that too. When I was around her age, maybe in my 20s, I was thinking, I'm not religious. I don't believe in organized religion. I'm just spiritual, The problem with that is if you get wrapped up into Reiki or yoga as in the Hindu practice of yoga, where you're actually getting into positions that are worshiping Hindu gods, that's a problem. It's a problem when I see a church in Norway, Christian church, where the people are literally doing yoga in the church in the shape of Hindu gods. That's a problem. But I digress. Here we go. Let's listen to Kayse.
And the consequences of this erasure are everywhere. Women have had to fight for centuries just to be acknowledged as spiritual leaders, priests, or theologians. Entire religious traditions have justified the oppression of women based on the belief that God created man in his image first. Femininity, when it does appear...
Interesting. I hadn't really caught this little nugget. God created man in his image first. I sense that she doesn't really enjoy that specific piece of information that came out of Genesis. Yes, God did. First, he created Adam, and then he grabbed a rib of Adam and created Eve as a helper. Again, that's just the way it is. You can keep kicking against the goads, but that's just what it is. I mean, come on. And it happens to be also, maybe this is another offensive thing, but when I was a weak Christian and hadn't really read the Bible, I always thought the angels the good angels were males and females. I thought there were male angels, big wings, and female angels with big wings. Well, turns out every time an angel has manifested as a person in the Bible, where they come across and they look like a person, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, they just all happen to be male with the ending L at the end of their name because of God. El is God. So it's really interesting, where the only time we see these manifestations all throughout the Old Testament, especially, and even the angel of the Lord, that was Jesus, happens to be male. Now, it doesn't offend me, and it shouldn't offend you. So if you do encounter a spiritual force that you hear a female voice at some point, or my sister had a situation where she was caught in a rip current and she heard the female voice that she says was Mother Mary telling her to not swim against it, not to fight it, saved her life. I suspect that wasn't just an angel. I suspect that was, as she perceived, Mother Mary. But I digress. Here we go.
In spiritual discourse is often framed in terms of submission, passivity, and receptivity, never authority, sovereignty, or power. And yet, every culture in history before monotheism took hold had a goddess. Long before the idea of a single male god dominated religious thought, humanity worshipped the divine in both masculine and feminine forms.
She's right. She's right. And I just showed that to you. She definitely is right. Pagan culture, women, the idea that, and at first you could say, did people invent these gods? Well, I don't know. Isn't it kind of, again, going back to my thought question, food for thought, why is it that no matter where you are in the world, people separated by thousands of miles and the inability to fly across the world in the past. You couldn't just fly over to Australia so easily or anything like that. They didn't even know about the New World for many, many, many centuries. The Europeans and the Asians didn't know about the New World. So why is it that there's so many like practices across these extraordinary geographical distances? In other words, why is it that they have these female goddesses of fertility all across the world? Is it that the humans dreamed up, all of them just happened to dream up coincidentally, female goddesses of fertility? Or is it that there are goddesses who are encouraging females and males to believe in them spiritually, spiritual beings that have somehow communicated that there are goddesses of fertility and have somehow convinced people, in some cases, that they need to sacrifice their children for better crops? Why is it we see that disgusting practice in both the New World and the Old World in ancient times? Absolutely disgusting, mortifying practice that no mother would do intrinsically. Like a mother who's the most closest bond you could have is to your child. For a mother to do that to her own children, to me, it speaks of a spiritual battle. I think it's quite clear. Now, Utopia Buster says, let's face it, men are just bigger and stronger. 9/10 of the things women can't do without today's society were developed and created due to the strength of men. Yeah, men are strong. Men are the ones who typically are the constructionists. They're the ones building the buildings. They're physically out there as the carpenters, as the carrying the steel, as the firefighters. Traditionally, that's men. It's very rare you see a woman in a major construction site. Men were the ones probably who built all of those gigantic churches in Europe. Okay, so that's just what it is. Now, that's not saying, certainly, this is not saying that there aren't some very strong females and there aren't some very weak men, but that's the exception to the rule. Generally, men are stronger than females. I know that in my own family. My sister-in-law and I went golfing with our family at Topgolf, where they can actually time the speed and the strength of your hit. And my sister-in-law and I are exactly 75% of the strength of the males, including the sons, our sons, very young sons, that much stronger than us already. That happened when they were like 16. Now they're a little bit older. But anyway, so here we go.
The earliest spiritual traditions revolved around the Great Mother, the giver of life, the source of creation, the protector, and the destroyer. The
Wonderful jobs of deception. Again, coming in from not from Kayse. Kayse, unfortunately, has fallen prey to this mindset. But unfortunately, through history, we have seen some goddesses, and they've never caused good. They've never led to a good outcome.
the protector, and the destroyer. In ancient Egypt, Isis was revered as the mother of all things. In Sumer, Inanna ruled over love, war, and wisdom. In Greece, Gaia was the very earth itself, the foundation of existence. In Hinduism, Shakti remains an essential, powerful force of creation. The goddess wasn't some minor figure or afterthought. She was primary. She was essential. She was everywhere. But as patriarchal systems took hold, the goddess was pushed aside, rewritten, and in many cases erased altogether.
No, what actually happened was the truth. Jesus came. He was the Word incarnate, Word made flesh, who dwelt among us. He shared the truth. He was able to collapse the religious systems of the past through the beliefs in Christianity, the belief that it wasn't the weak. It wasn't God didn't necessarily bless the rich and the powerful and the strong. Rather, Jesus came down here and said, the meek shall inherit the world. He said, I am the only way, the truth, and the light, the life. If you want to come to the Father, you go through Jesus. Jesus is the only way, truth, and the life. And Christianity right now has about 2.3 billion adherents around the world. That's pretty huge. Pretty huge percent of people believe in the truth. Jesus said he is the truth. And the reason why many people believe, and the reason why this belief system lasted. Now, I spent a little time this morning listening to James Fedor, who's an atheist over there in the United Kingdom. And he's got a little thing going on. And he was just saying that, according to him, Jesus was a historical figure that people made into sort of a mythological figure, a legend, somebody who could perform miracles, but that was never intended. And I asked a question in the chat that he didn't answer, but I thought it was important that he should answer that, is to consider the experiences of the earliest Christians. Look at Jesus and what he did. He came, he was part of a very obscure little town in the ancient Near East, And he wasn't a king himself. He wasn't a warrior. He was a peacemaker. He was a prince of peace, and he was a servant of God, and he was humble and obedient. And what he did, he said things like, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But what he did, which is really important, was he changed the world. And he did it at a time when you were crucified, beheaded upside down, and martyred for believing in him. Some of the same things that we're seeing going on today in Syria, around the world, we were seeing way back in the old days for the earliest Christians. They had literally no motivation, no sexual, no physical, no material motivation to make up a story about a myth in those times, because that would get them killed. Rather, they were in the unique position to know what they believed was the absolute truth. And so when you say that people in ancient times crafted this story of Jesus and embellished upon the Gospels and did all this kind of stuff, you really need to take a look at history and look at the way that the ancient people who worshiped Jesus did so to their own detriment. Again, St. Paul was beheaded. He was beheaded under Nero, well documented. Peter was crucified upside down, also well documented. The apostle, the evangelist John, was boiled in oil, again, documented. And many other people beheaded, martyred, burned at the stake, really egregious things. Polycarp, Ignatius of Antioch. I could go on and on about the martyrdoms of the people and how they suffered all the way up until about 313, when Constantine legalized Christianity for the 5 to 6 million people at that time who were adherents. If this was not to survive, if this were man-made, it wouldn't have spread as it did throughout the world, despite these massive persecutions. But when you're speaking for the truth, and you're speaking for life, people will do what they can to shed the good news, especially if they feel like their eyes have been opened and the scales fell from their eyes, as we see with the Apostle Paul. But here we go.
Remained was a masculine god ruling alone, a father without a mother, a king without a queen. I refuse to accept that the only way to describe the divine is through a masculine lens.
I think she might find it kind of interesting. Also in the Old Testament, there was a specific reverence for the Queen Mother. So you had King David. He was obviously the king of Israel right around 1,000 years before Christ. And who did he ask or consult, or who came to him to be an intercessor for the people? It was his Queen Mother, Bathsheba. Solomon. Solomon went to his Queen Mother, Bathsheba. Bathsheba was the wife of his father, David. So Solomon consulted with the Queen Mother because Solomon had hundreds of wives. He couldn't just go to one of his wives and say, she's queen. He had to give it that special duty, the Gebira, to the mother, the Queen Mother. Who's Jesus's Queen Mother? Well, Mother Mary. And we have evidence of that when she was crowned, in Revelation 12. A woman appeared in the sky, clothed, with the stars and a crown on her head. That's all Mother Mary. She's the Queen Mother of Jesus. So here we go.
I refuse to participate in a system that has erased half of divinity, half of humanity, and half of me. We all have masculine and feminine traits within us. But again, when you reinforce from birth that God is a he, him, that God is a father, and you have these little girls in Sunday school, like it starts affecting their psychology from day one to see the masculine as more aligned with divine than them. There's no surprise that
I think she's fine when she says more aligned with the divine than them. Is she's basically saying, I think she's fighting for this idea that we're all gods. And sadly, that's kind of the mindset that some atheists take. Even if they don't admit it, they're their own gods. And so they want to be recognized as gods and revered as gods, and they want to be and so that's a challenge. It's a challenge for this woman here who's feeling like, well, geez, if I want to be my own God, I'm not going to be respected as much as my male counterparts who are their own gods. And so you can see where this is coming and going really, unfortunately, down the wrong path. So Utopia Buster says these type of atheists rarely, if any, take an in-depth look at Matthew and Luke to have an objective standard when making claims about the divinity of Jesus. It's true. Or to look at Mark 14:62. The Pharisees asked Jesus when they had captured him, who are you? Are you the Son of the Most High? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of the Most High sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven, confirming his divinity. Going back to Daniel 7, Psalm 112, and more. So here we go.
Women being submissive to their husbands in the Christian church has been upheld for all of this time because, again, when you from birth are reinforcing this idea that Jesus was the 100% man and 100% divine, which is a concept that I was told all of the time, that reinforces the closer alignment of masculinity with divinity. And so I'm always asking, like, why wasn't Jesus a hermaphrodite? Why wasn't Jesus androgynous?
Because he made them man and woman. Genesis 1:27. Let us make man in our image. And he made him man and woman. Okay, so that's just the deal. There is, sorry, but Jesus was not Barney. Jesus came down here as a male. And actually, if you take a look at the Shroud of Turin and you can see how they've recreated the body of Jesus, he was a very strong, muscular male. And he apparently was around 6 feet tall. And so representing very male features. And that's just what it is. Just deal with it. He wasn't a hermaphrodite. And I'm glad he wasn't a hermaphrodite. That would be a little weird for our Lord to be a hermaphrodite. That would be adding a massive amount of confusion for people these days. We already have enough confusion going on in the world. We don't need more.
And unless it's because God the Father and Jesus the Son, these two constructs have been upheld over time because it gives men more power in.
No, that's exactly not what it is. In fact, if you really look at what Jesus said, he said, you're going to have to bear your own cross. You're going to go through tribulations. You're not going to get power as a Christian unless you're, somebody like a Joel Osteen who's going to go bilk your own people and have a house that's worth $10 million. Generally, Christians are, especially in many parts of the world, are not given any power. Right now, they're literally being killed in Syria just for existing. They've been beheaded periodically in recent times by Muslims, by crazy radical Muslims. And so we see that kind of stuff going on. It's a real tragedy. But no, the idea with following Christianity, that doesn't make life easy if you follow it as Jesus said to follow it. If you follow it and try to pursue sainthood. Saints don't achieve power. What saints in the world do you know that have achieved power? None. Rather, they give up power. They give up themselves. That's what Jesus called on us to do. Give up yourself. You have to be selfless. That's how it is.
The church, using the word God to describe all that is benevolent and good and divine without acknowledging its masculine connotations.
What is wrong with masculine? I think the problem is our education system. I'm going to say, I don't know this girl, Kayse, but I have a feeling she was educated in our school system here in the United States from her accent, her U.S. accent. And I think that she probably grew up with the term toxic masculinity. And I feel bad for the gentlemen of these days, the kids who are in Gen Z and even the millennials, growing up with these ideas of toxic masculinity. There is nothing wrong with masculinity, okay? Period. There's nothing wrong with it, unless you take the extreme, disgusting form that Andrew Tate has taken. But if you're a normal guy who wants to be a Christian, follow Jesus in all humility, masculinity can be a good thing. Here we go.
Is an incomplete truth. It's an unbalanced equation. Why should I uphold a view that continues to prioritize masculinity over femininity? Masculinity is already worshipped in every aspect of society.
I just wanted to point out something about Jesus that I know those of you who follow Jesus know, and you probably realized. And what I found really exciting when I first came back to Christianity, and I left the Catholicism in the 90s. I was upset about the way that things were being handled in the church. I was in the Baptist and Lutheran faiths for a while, and then after, I don't know, what was it, about 19 years or so, I came back to Christianity in 2022. And what I can say, came back to Catholicism in 2022. What I can say, though, is what I found out when I was a Protestant. I started digging into the Bible. Super excited to have the very first person to hear about Jesus' arrival on the earth was Mother Mary. He gave his mother that special right. He also gave her she was crowned as a queen in heaven, according to Revelation 12. And the other thing was the women at the tomb, who were the first people to discover Jesus' empty tomb and meet Jesus. That would be Mary Magdalene, and then the women on the road. And then eventually we had, of course, the apostle Peter and John. and then the others, and then he appeared to 500. He appeared to all these people, but first he appeared to women. Jesus traveled with women at a time when women weren't given many rights at all. In fact, he went completely against the way that the culture was of his time. It's exciting stuff when you think about it. Jesus loves women just as much as he loves men, and he has given us complementary roles. Women are to be mothers, if possible. Men are to be fathers, if possible.
In leadership and philosophy and history and spirituality. It's given dominance in nearly every major religion. It's revered in politics. It's positioned as the default. And I will not add to that. If the divine is truly beyond gender, then why is God always assumed to be male? Why is it
I don't think the divine is truly beyond gender. I think that unfortunately people get a little wrapped up with that. I think some of this confusion is coming over people's confusion about whether they think they can assign pronouns, but I digress.
so difficult to say goddess instead? I have 100% transitioned to like saying oh my goddess instead of oh my god. And sometimes people are like, why would you say that? Why does it matter? And I'm like, well, honestly, if you can't understand why it's important, then I have nothing to tell you. Why does the masculine still hold a monopoly on the sacred? When I speak of the divine, I will not erase the feminine. I will not default to a term that excludes me. If God is just a construct, then so is the assumption that divinity must be expressed in male terms.
She seems kind of angry. And I'm hoping that I'm hoping that she finds God. I honestly do, because I can relate to her, sort of her mentality. Again, I'm much older than she is, but I'm going back to the 80s or something like that when I was younger, 90s when I was younger. And I could think about how I was sort of a first tier feminist, and I had some of those same beliefs that she had. And my mind was changed. It took some time for my mind to be changed, but my mind was changed. And I hope hers is too. So say a little prayer for Kayse. Her name is Kayse. I've got a link to her full channel and also to this video. If you want to see the full video, I think I skipped the last minute, but take a look at that and say some prayers for her. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for God's glory. Thank you for showing up today. Thank you, Utopia Busters. Great to see you. Bye-bye.